In chapter 1134, we first see Loki talking to his friend Mosa over a special cold Den Mushi, which is also voice activated. But we have no idea who Mosa, also known as Shaggy, is nearly 50 chapters later. This video is going to look at the top contenders, then narrow it down to the most likely solution for this mysterious person. We only have 2 conversations and 14 total panels to use for clues, but I believe we should first make a list of the clues Oda has left so we can begin to whittle down the suspects and land at a surprising option. We know that Mosa is kind and empathetic to Loki. They also see through Loki's threats of violence and childish false bravado. We know that Mosa has a very unique way of speaking that some have called feminine and somewhat regal or noble. Japanese speakers have noted that Mosa is very respectful of Loki, the current king of Elbaph. We know Mosa had a recent traumatic event that they are still scared of, and a new event that caused Mosa to say goodbye to Loki suddenly in chapter 1151. We also know that Loki and Mosa have never met, but they have been talking for a long time, likely years while Loki was tied up to the tree on Elbaph. With these limited clues, let's look at the suspects. The Giant Elder Mountain Beard Jarl, Biblo the Owl who runs the Owl Library, St. Marcus Mars, Koala the Revolutionary, King Neptune of Fishman Island, his daughter Shirahoshi the Mermaid Princess, and Morley, another revolutionary. First off is Jarl. I think this is one of the least likely due to the fact someone surely would have heard Jarl talking to Loki and recognized Loki's voice. Jarl is an old-school Elbaph warrior, so he wouldn't be as empathetic with the King of the Giants despite knowing the secret of Harold's death, and there was no recent event Jarl would be traumatized that we know of. I think that because of these clues, we have to give Jarl a Shaggy It Wasn't Me rating, so on to the second option, Biblo. I also don't like this option because he would rarely leave the Owl Library, meaning others could overhear Loki talking to Biblo. And again, we do not know of a recent traumatic event they would be scared of if they have been in the library for such a long time. I will say it is interesting that Biblo has a grow fruit, and Mosa can refer to growing in Japanese. But because of the other points missing, I think we have another Shaggy It Wasn't Me rating. The third option is St. Marcus Mars, which I will admit was an interesting theory based on the fact there may be a traitor in the Gorosei. But to make this one short, Mars seems loyal to Emu and was working hard to stop Vegapunk's transmission recently on Egghead Island. Also, there is risk of someone overhearing a call to Loki, and Mars could be Thanos to the snap of Emu's fingers like St. Saturn was, so I doubt it's Mars or any other Gorosei. I think we can give the entire 5 Gorosei roster and It Wasn't Me rating. The fourth choice from the fandom was Koala because koalas are furry, but I don't think her speech patterns line up other than being feminine. For that reason, I really doubt it's Koala, so she too gets an It Wasn't Me rating. A fifth option, King Neptune, was brought up because he is a king and speaks like one. He is hairy or shaggy. He knew of Loki from Harold, his friend, and because he may have had the ability to trade a snail to communicate at some point. I have an issue with Neptune being Mosa because he doesn't speak feminine enough. Also, Mosa never said Neptune's favorite word, Jamon, and because Neptune likely wouldn't know the truth of his friend Harold's death at the hands of Loki, so he wouldn't be as kind as Mosa. For those reasons, I think we have another It Wasn't Me rating. The current heavy favorite is Shirahoshi. This is because she has a regal way of speaking, has told Luffy to stop yelling like Mosa did to Loki at one point, and because both Goldie Roger and Harold made a joke that Neptune's daughter would be hairy or shaggy like he is. I have to admit this does seem like the best choice, but I do have an issue with Shirahoshi seeing through Loki's threats, as she is very unskilled in conversations after her decade locked in a tower to protect her from Vanderdecken. I also have an issue with the timing of Loki and Shirahoshi exchanging snails to communicate. Loki being tied to the tree for the past 6 years and Shirahoshi being locked in the tower for a decade and not seeing the surface before she went to the Reverie. Both the events at the Reverie and Hody Jones would qualify as recent trauma, but what would be the new event? Some have theorized the new event is Blackbeard going to take Shirahoshi after Caribou informed the Yonko that Shirahoshi is the ancient weapon Poseidon. But I would be shocked if the Master of Chaos Blackbeard wasn't going to Wano, which is closer to Hachinosu, to verify Caribou's information. And it would be surprising if Blackbeard wasn't using the Chaos in the Holy Land of Marijua for some other goal. The man loves his chaos like Marineford when he stole Whitebeard's fruit, and Impel Down when he used the chaos to recruit new crewmates. I could see it being Shirahoshi if Loki's use of the honorary Ko as in Mosa Ko was an attempt at a clue that Mosa is from a royal family. But some nuance is missed in the fact that when Loki used that term, it was more in the context of an insult. If you spill water on yourself, I might mock you by saying good work, champ, which is actually using champ as more of an insult than saying you are really good at drinking. Similarly, Loki was likely mocking how diplomatic or forgiving Mosa was in the previous situation he was referring to when he said Mosako. I would also like to point out at no time does Mosa use one of the mermaid princess's favorite honorary terms, Sama, and Mosa clearly respects Loki, so that doesn't seem to fit. Let me make it clear again, Shirahoshi is the favorite of the community for a good reason, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I think she has the "it wasn't me" rating too. So who are we left with? This is where my theory gets interesting. Morley of the Fur from the Revolutionary Army. Morley is very empathetic and kind, as shown when Kuma appeared with the Revs looking for Bonnie's cure and when she saved Kuma from slavery during the reverie. Also, when Sabo called the Revs after escaping the reverie, she was worried, and is kind to generally anyone the giant is not engaged in battle with. She is new Kama, which Ivankov said meant the person had lived as both a male and a female before. Whereas Okama in One Piece refers to cross-dressing males like we saw during Sanji's time in Kamabaka Queendom during the time skip. This is a fictional world Oda created, so let go of any prejudices you have about the real world when dealing with Ivankov. It is also important to look at her Vivre card from the One Piece Visual Encyclopedia, which can be updated or retconned but is approved by Oda himself. In her Vivre card, it says Morley has the heart of a maiden and the body of a middle-aged man, and she calls herself Atashi, which is a term for a cutesy-sounding girl. That would fit a more timid and feminine Mosa way of speaking. And Morley also dislikes violent boys as shown in her recent fight with Pinkbeard, so she would likely call out Loki's yelling at her. The current event Morley needed to say goodbye for is likely the Revolutionary Army sieging the Holy Land, as Ivankov mentioned was about to occur, and Lafitte confirmed to Blackbeard in chapter 1124. This may also be supported with Mosa and Loki both having downtime to start the first call, but something happened to make Mosa call to say goodbye to Loki. Waiting on a siege would be boring, especially if you're waiting on the Holy Knights to move like Dragon mentioned before. The recent trauma is likely the first raid on Marijois by the Rev commanders when she saved Kuma and fought Aramaki. This may have even been hinted at by unofficial translations when Loki mentioned letting some nasty business crop up again. Green Bull is a grow man with a forest fruit, so the unofficial translations may have accidentally revealed Mosa's identity. It is also interesting to look at Green Bull for another reason. His fruit is the Mori fruit or the forest fruit. And in 2012's film Zed, we have a non-canon fruit used by Benz named the Mosa fruit, which translates to the grow fruit. Oda seemingly got rid of the Mosa fruit and 6 years later introduced Green Bull with his Mori fruit. In Romanized Japanese, Morley is actually Mori, so we have a connection through the Mosa and Mori from those two fruits, which may be Oda doing wordplay. But let's look at another form of wordplay similar to how Gecko Moria can become Kozoki Moria with a little change in the characters used. Morley can be written like this, meaning Mori, and Mosa can be written like this. If you move the line on the far right of Mori into the third character, it becomes nearly identical to Mosa, with an extra line in the middle that I think just means to elongate the sound. I am not a Japanese speaker, so maybe I'm just looking at something random. But it is possibly an interesting way to again show Mori and Mosa may be the same after a transition, and could be Oda playing with words and symbols again, which he is famous for. But let me dial up this theory a bit, and please stay with me here because it's a little crazy, but Morley is also formerly known as Ida, Loki's aunt. We know from SBS 91 that Morley was once imprisoned in Impel Down over a century ago, and escaped sometime later when she created Impel Down 5.5, which Ivankov turned into New Kama Land. And Ida met Harold on the circus island around 110 years ago. The circus island that Ida said saved her from something, so that possibly lines up. We also know that Morley is relatively new to the Revolutionary Army, and when Kuma was looking for Bonnie's cure, Morley welcomed him. She had been around the Revolutionary Army for some time if she knew Kuma, who had not been active in years. That may actually line up with Ivankov performing miracles, like how during Impelled Down we saw Bibelot, a prince from an unknown kingdom, attack Ivankov. Because around 17 years ago, Ivankov used his hormone fruit to make Bibelot's father, a king, into a queen. And we assume Ida died 15 or so years ago, which would be exactly when Ivankov was using his fruit to create new Kama like Morley, who again has lived as both a man and a woman. Ivankov also said he can manipulate everything from gender to hair color and eye color to skin pigment and elasticity, which would create a heck of a disguise if someone wanted to hide. Ivankov, however, does not know Morley created level 5.5, so what other secrets is she hiding from her allies in the Revolutionary Army? Also to be noted is that Ida and Morley were both born around the same time of 160-ish years ago. Both are the two shortest giants we know of. Both call out others' violence, both are empathetic for humans and try to help them, and both are also soft-spoken when not in combat. Ida allegedly died from ergot spores, a real-life affliction that takes a long time to consume enough tainted grains to actually kill someone. Oda doesn't like using real-life diseases, and in this case it seems to be implied Ida was only poisoned once, not repetitively. Plus, in our world, if you stop eating the infected grains, the illness will go away. Was Ida another fake-out death? It wouldn't be the first time Oda misled us with a death, and Ida pushed Harold to be more peaceful, again a trait she seems to share with Morley, who called out the violence of boys before. After the threats of violence against her and her son Haruden, after Loki attacked the village who bragged they poisoned Ida, would she have chosen to leave Elbaph to stop the violence committed around her, and had the doctor fake her death so that she could disappear? Later, Ida hears her former lover Harold didn't get the promised peace with the world government, so Ida joined the Revolutionary Army to avenge Harold. I know that may be a stretch, but Ida really does abhor violence, and wants to help humans. That may actually point at an inspiration for Ida, The Princess by Lord Alfred Tennyson, which was adapted to the stage by Gilbert and Sullivan and renamed Princess Ida. In the story, a princess named Ida flees men's violent nature and society as a whole to start a women's-only university. And again, Ida and Morley have both called out others' violence before. It is a story around the themes of gender roles, with the prince that Ida was supposed to marry and his friends pretending to be women to join the university. And when discovered, Ida nearly dies after falling into a river where the prince saves her. Later, after a fight, the prince falls into a coma. Similar to One Piece, Ida fell into a coma, but the prince survives with the help of Princess Ida, who learns to love her future husband. The story The Princess by Lord Tennyson may be an inspiration Oda took from. But what about another famous work by another legend of literature, the bard himself, William Shakespeare? In the story of Macbeth, we have the tale of the Scottish protagonist Macbeth, who meets three witches who prophesize that Macbeth would become king. After Macbeth and his wife hatch a plan to kill King Duncan to take the crown, and plan to frame his attendants for murder. Macbeth, as the newly crowned king, then remembers the other part of the prophecy that his friend Banquo is going to become the head of a new line of kings, and Macbeth plans to end his friend's life. After which, Macbeth receives another prophecy from the witches warning of Macduff, who is in England trying to find allies to fight Macbeth, and who is warned not to be underestimated. And that a man not born of a woman will kill Macbeth and take his crown, along with a forest needing to move onto a particular hillside nearby, which seems impossible. Macduff recruits an army and has his men carry tree branches onto the prophesized hillside for camouflage, and Macduff reveals he was born of a cesarean section and was not naturally born of a woman, thus fulfilling the prophecy the witches gave when Macduff kills Macbeth and is crowned king. The epic tale from the bard has a man not born of a woman, and if Ida is now Morley, then she isn't currently a woman, and Haruden becomes more like Macduff. The first encounter Macbeth has with the three witches takes place on Macbeth's hillock, which is located near Castle Brodie in County Mori, Scotland. Remember, Morley is Mori in Japanese, which has a similar sound to Moray, Scotland, and seems like Oda wordplay again. That's where it gets more interesting. The Castle Brodie is also said to have a curse on it that no man born on castle ground shall become king. Which is curious when you consider Loki was born in Aarhus Castle but doesn't seem to like being king, and Haruden, born outside of the castle, said his goal was to become king of the giants. And Loki is known as the accursed prince of Elbaph. Brodie may come from the Gaelic word brothach, which means a muddy place. Morley has the push-push fruit, which allows her to turn the ground into a mud-like substance that she can then push around, even creating caves. Also associated with the clan Brodie is Alexander, the Good Lord Brodie, and in One Piece, Harold has been referred to as the Good King of Elbaph. Good Lord Brodie resided over witch trials, and Good King Harold married what some consider a witch that may have started the curse of Loki. But the detail that brought me to the Brodie clan originally was that Morley has an almost exact tartan pattern match to the clan Brodie, with red, black, and yellow being used. The Brodie clan motto is to unite, something Ida pushed Harold to do with the world government. The clan flower is a periwinkle, also known as Fleur de Morte or the flower of death, and is laid on graves like Ida's. It is also possibly the something blue from the famous wedding rhyme, and Harold regretted not marrying his true love Ida. Another possible inspiration was the clan Mori of Japan, who were daimyos during the feudal period and even had a war with the Oda clan. A little ironic considering the author of One Piece is an Oda himself. A samurai retainer named Mori Ranmaru from the Mori clan, but who had allegiance to the Oda clan, may have an interesting tie. Besides burning everyone who had locked themselves inside of a building, including himself and his master, similar in a way to Odin burning himself to save his retainers in One Piece. Ranmaru was also known to be androgynous and was likely the lover of his master. That again plays with some themes surrounding Ivankov and gender fluidity and gender roles. Also, much like The Princess by Tennyson, and I am not arguing real-life social issues, so let's get back to the story Oda-san has been crafting. As I mentioned earlier, Ivankov has been sort of a Chekhov's gun, which is a plot element introduced early in a story whose later significance to the plot doesn't become apparent until much later. It was a story device used by Anton Chekhov, a 19th century Russian playwright who said one must never place a loaded rifle on stage if it isn't going to go off. Most people assume Crocodile is that plot point, but Morley is likely also one too. She also created Impel Down 5.5, and a fat, hairy, middle-aged man would be a great disguise for Ida to use to hide from the world. Morley has some secrets like creating Impel Down 5.5, escaping the prison at some point after, and some mysterious incident mentioned in an SBS. It is entirely possible Morley and Ida lied about their past to throw off the world government after escaping Impel Down 2. Also important is that the Denden Mushi choose to look like the speaker as mentioned in an SBS, so the cold-resistant snail may just choose to be warm. And we do know the Revolutionary Army breeds special snails like the white jammer snail, so they could be responsible for this special cold snail. The fact that this cold snail is also voice activated may be relevant. What better way than to listen in on Loki and hear Shamrock's recruitment pitch than to have a special voice activated spy snail for the Revs? Dragon said that the real battle would start when the Holy Knights mobilized, and after Shamrock tried to recruit Loki, he was recalled because things got worse in Marijois. To me, Morley fits every clue of Mosa. There is Oda wordplay, famous literature that may be inspirations, Ida seeing through Loki's threat like Mosa did to the kind soul under his facade, and even Ida and Morley's timelines match up reasonably well. I will say it again, I am 100% okay with Mosa being Shirahoshi for that the two sovereigns can meet, but I think too many things don't fit to say Mosa is Shirahoshi. So what do you think about this theory? It's one I've been cooking since chapter 1134 came out when Mosa was first introduced, and I keep finding new details that may add to the evidence. 17 chapters later in 1151 was their second conversation when I began predicting Ida would fake her own death in chapter 1178 like what actually happened. And if this math piece is correct, then 17 chapters later, 1185, Mosa, Ida, or Morley will be revealed, which is interesting for a completely different reason. About that same week will be the first time we hear Mosa speak in the anime, which was delayed months. And that could reveal who Mosa is more than limited panels we've seen of Mosa speaking in the manga. If you like this theory and what I cooked up, please give this video a like. If you have any other ideas, then please comment below. And please subscribe to me, Neon Roger, for more One Piece theories, and check out my other videos if you would. Much love, friends, and thanks for watching.